Okay, so we're talking about not just weed here, we're talking about mushrooms and the natural psychedelics, correct? Is that what we're talking about, or what are we talking about?
Okay, so what these campaigns, so what happened in DC was a decriminalize nature campaign, which for those who have been following, they'll know that these campaigns have been passing all over the US for the last few years. But for those that don't know, what these campaigns typically entail is they apply to the plant-based drugs in Schedule 1. And what's interesting is that coca and poppy, I believe, are in Schedule 2. And the decrim nature bills never include coca or poppy, which I have my own issue with, I think. Anyway, but what the campaigns did, what they have done in almost each case in which they've been passed, is they ask the law enforcement in that city or that district or what have you to move the enforcement of the law that prohibits the possession of those drugs to the lowest priority. In other words, the law is still on the books, but they're asking the cops to basically take a hands-off approach, unless if they find someone who's dealing, like hundreds of hits of acid and has pounds of shrooms and is like, then they would still crack down with the charges. And they even, I don't know for a fact, but like how small they will go. But what's interesting is there have already been busts in a lot of the places where these campaigns have passed. So it's important for people to understand that even though they're called decriminalized nature, technically, well, from one perspective they are, because a loose reading of the word decriminalize means any type of like loosening of the policy or whatever. But a strict reading, and a lot of people argue that it's not a decriminalization because it technically is still a crime. So it's very like nuanced. And I personally, I mean, I understand the politics of why we had to do it that way in DC, because the Congress has control over the budget in DC. And there's a lot of history with that I could get into, but I'll spare you the rabbit hole. But basically in DC, there are very real reasons why we actually cannot like outright decriminalize Schedule 1 drugs because of the relationship that the city has with Congress, because it's not a state. But in the other places, I mean, I think this is like a form of incrementalism. And it's interesting because anyway, yeah, so that's like the technical reading of what these bills do. And I served as the community liaison for the DC campaign. In other words, I was like on the ground explaining to people what we're doing. I was talking to voters in DC saying, hey, here's what we want to do, here's why. And because, as I mentioned, the Psych Society that I had started a few years ago, that very much kind of like played it. Like it was in large part like because of all the work I had done through the society, where we were constantly hosting meetings and events and helping to make these drugs more normal. And then that led very naturally into my role in the campaign as like the on the ground guy, one of the on the ground guys. There were a lot of people involved, so I'm not trying to take the credit at all, because there was a huge team involved in.
You gave it grassroots credibility that somebody just coming in fresh out of nowhere would not have been able to have with the people who might have been distrustful of that kind of thing. Okay.
Right. So, exactly.
So I was not surprised. So, okay. So now thank you for clarifying the different sort of types of decriminalization and whatnot. I was a little surprised when I heard about this in DC. It did not surprise me, obviously, when it happened in Oakland or Oregon or even too much in Denver. But I was a little surprised for a second in DC. And then pretty quickly, as the mushrooms always do, if you ask the question, they will provide the answer, right? Yeah. And one of the suspicions that I have always had about these substances. And when I say suspicious, I'm not casting negativity on the substance, right?
Right.
But that it sort of creates a network. And once you're sort of part of that network, you're always part of the network. And that, you know, Washington, D.C. is one of the places people are the most obsessed with knowing everything that people are doing and who's saying what about who and who knows what information they're either supposed to know or not supposed to know, classified, not classified, top secret, who did this, who did that, who made this deal, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
And
totally.
that there's a lot of people around who are not in positions of power, but who are sort of proximate to positions of power that know a lot of things that could get a lot of people in trouble.